Man has always been interested in what has transpired in the past. He's interested in history. And especially those people who understand that the Bible represents an accurate history from his creation to the present time. The problem has been no one has been able to accurately determine a calendar that would show these different dates as they progress through the Bible. The Bible is filled with dates. We read them and we pass over them. But I'm going to demonstrate to you today that we do have a very accurate instrument for determining the calendars throughout the Bible. From the very creation day, that Sabbath day, the seventh day of the very first week, to the present day that we are living in today. And so, that's the reason for this presentation about the calendar generator. So let's get started and see what the generator is about. Here we see September 11th, 2001, and how this generator would work. We would enter 2001 in the upper cell. Click on AD, which is the period of time that we're in, and then click on Generate, and it would produce a calendar that we see on the right-hand side of the screen. Here, we're going to see an event in history that occurred on September 11th, 2001. This is a well-documented event. On September 11th, 2001 at 8:45 a.m., on a clear Tuesday morning, 2 jets slammed into the Twin Towers, destroying them. If you look, you'll see a circle, a yellow circle, that encircles the 8th of September. The reason that we've circled the 8th of September because this calendar is based on a 7-day week. Its starting point was the creation. And the creation starts with a 7-day week and comes forward down to our time in increments of 7 days. And so these calendars that you see here, the black calendar, which is the one that we have circled for the 8th, is, in fact, the Gregorian calendar. This is the calendar that we use today. The calendar below it, in red, is the Hebrew calculated calendar. It's a different calendar. People really aren't familiar with it. But you're going to see how important that calendar, the important part it's going to play in producing an accurate calendar. And the bottom line is in blue. And this calendar that you see there is a result of what we know as the solar calendar. It's a record of the number of years that and the number of weeks it took for the Earth to circle the sun. So these are the 3 calendars. Now, you'll note that the yellow is circled on the 8th. And what we're looking for is the 11th. So the 9th is Sunday, the 10th is Monday, and the 11th is Tuesday. And that's exactly the date that we're looking for September 11th of 2001. The next calendar we're going to look at, and what I have done here is I'm going to show 3 calendars. And those 3 calendars are going to be calendars of historic events that we should be aware of. And so the second calendar that you're going to see here is for December 7th, 1941. Now, that, if we enter that into that cell here, 1941 AD, and generate, we're going to produce the calendar that we see to the right. Now, December 7th, 1941 started on a typical Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor. That's when the Japanese attacked the United States. We should be able to see in the calendar generator that it generates an accurate date for that Sunday. If we look here, we see that the black day 6 is circled. and that is the first Saturday in the month of December for 1941. And of course, we know that the 6th was a Saturday, so the 7th was a Sunday, and that's exactly what this calendar is showing. So it is accurate. We're going to see a third date in the history of the United States, and this date would be July 4th, 1776. Now, most people don't realize what day of the week that document was signed on. But you can discover it if you go on the internet and look it up. You can see the exact date that it was signed on. Here, again, we enter 1776 in the first cell. It's AD, generate, and it produces a calendar for that year, 1776. Now, let me read something from the internet that tells you the date. It says, on Thursday, July 4th, 1776, the provisional government of the 13 American colonies, known as the Continental Congress, adopted the Declaration of Independence. And so there we have it. It was a Thursday. And that day was the Saturday, July 6th. Well, the Declaration was signed on a Thursday, the 4th, so we have to subtract days. So the 5th would have been a Friday, and the 4th would have been a Thursday. And that's exactly when it was signed. So you can see that the generator is producing accurate calendars. At least we can demonstrate this in the present time. But the real key here is to be able to show you that the calendar generator not only accurately produces calendars for the present, but it will produce accurate calendars from the past. The reason being that it is based on a series of events that are recognized by starting with the creation week and coming forward in increments of 7. Now you would think, well, that's a lot of 7s. You're absolutely right. It is a lot of 7s. We're looking at year 1 of the creation. And of course, we recognize that the first Sabbath, and that's, your Bible calls it that, this first Sabbath is on the 7th day of creation. We go forward in that very first year, you see 7, 14, 21, 28, etc., until we come down to the 364th day of the year. And we see that the last Sabbath is on the 364th day. Now, there is something we need to understand about the year in order to realize why we're using the progression of time that we are. The year that we're using here, the solar year, is based on a 365 and a quarter days. But it's important that we recognize that it isn't quite 365 and a quarter, but it actually is 11 minutes longer than the actual year. The quarter is 11 minutes longer than the actual year. The actual year is 11 minutes short of that time. Every 4th year, we have a leap year. That's what happens. In other words, we are pretty familiar with leap years. Every 4th year, we have a leap year. And the reason for that is because of this extra quarter day that we have to account for. But we also have to account for that 11 minutes. We have to do a little math here to determine, well, when are we going to account for that 11 minutes that was missing? Well, you would have to account for it at 128 years. You're going to see this as we go through this. So remember, here we go back to year 1, and we find that year 1 has a 1-day carryover into year 2. And here we see year 2. So what that means is the first Sabbath is on the 6th. The 13th, the 20th, the 27th. The last Sabbath is on the 63rd. Now, what that tells us is, ooh, now we have 2 days to carry over. So we go into the third year carrying those 2 extra days, which puts the Sabbath on the 5th, the 12th, the 19th. And the last Sabbath occurs on the 362nd day, leaving a carryover of 3 days. So going into the 4th year, we have a 3-day carryover. Well, that means that the first Sabbath, 3 and 4 is 7, the first Sabbath is on the 4th, the 11th, the 18th, the 25th, and the last Sabbath is on the 361st day. But remember, this is the 4th year. This year has 366 days in it, not 365. So therefore, when we make the subtraction, we find that we have a 5-day carryover this time. It was going along real nice, 1, 2, 3, and now all of a sudden we jump to 5. The 5th year, the first Sabbath is on the 2nd, the 9th, the 16th, and the last Sabbath is on the 359th day. We're back to 365. So now we have a 6-day carryover for the year 5. We look to year 6, and with the 6-day carryover, well, it gives us the first Sabbath on the first day of the 6th year. 1, 8, 15, etc. The last day ends up on the 365th day. So, that's really kind of neat, because now we start all over just like we were in the first year. For the 7th year is just like the first year. We see that we have a 1-day carryover as we go into the 8th year. The 8th year, again, is a leap year, 366 days. And so, as a result of that, we have a carryover of 3 days to start the 9th year. We know what happens. The 9th year, 365 days, we had that 3-day carryover. As we go into the 10th year, we have a 4-day carryover. If we go into the 10th year with a 4-day carryover, the first Sabbath is on the 3rd, the 10th, the 17th. The last Sabbath is 365, and this results in a 5-day carryover. So, okay, well, what does all of this mean? Well, I'm going to show you what it means. First of all, we have to understand that no matter how many times you go through this arrangement of weeks and years, you will always come up with one of 7 types of years. And so this is what I've done for convenience sake. I've named them. A 1-day carryover is type 1. Type 2 is a 2-day carryover. Type 3 is a 3-day carryover. Type 4 is a 4-day carryover. Type 5 is a 6-day carryover. Type 6 has 0 days to carry over. Type 10 has 5 days to carry over. The designation of the types was just done because it's kind of how they occurred in the first 10 years. As a result of that, what I was able to do is start producing a calendar that reflects these types of years. Here we see the years 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the years starting at creation. Now, basically, they're named AM years. This is something that you should keep in mind, after man. And so this is what we're looking at. We're not looking at those other calendars yet. We're just looking at this one solar calendar that we know is absolute. As we look at that, we can see year 1, we see the day carryover, 1, 2, 3, 5, and here are the types over here in this column. Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, Type 10, Type 5, Type 6. Going to have to keep that in mind because you'll see how this is going to play out. Now, here is an expanded calendar where we pick up as we left off on the 14th year, 15th year, and we go down and you see that I have the 28th year circled in red. There's a reason for that. Because I discovered when I was going through this that the types start all over. So it took 28 years, and now we're repeating this. And as you see here, you see a 1, a 2, and if we add the rest, you'd see the other types of years following just as they did for the creation year. Here, I pick this up and I go to the 56th year, which is double 28. And you know what we see here? Take a look. 1, 2, 3, 10, 5, 6. This is the same rotation that we had when we started at year 1. And so you can see that this 28 years it's working quite nicely. If we take 28 years again and add it to 56, we come up with the year 84. And if you look here, you see again at this time, we see the same thing happening. 1, 2, 3, 10, 5. These are the years. And so this again just shows you that, well, it's repeating itself. Year 112. We see the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 10. It's the same thing. It's repeating itself. But now, this is the real important thing here, which we can't ignore. Because remember, we had that 11-minute problem. So when we get to 128, we can't take a leap year. Because we have already taken too much time. So we have to make up for that. So what happens by not taking a leap year? We see that the designation, the types of years are going to change from here. The order is going to change. And so as a result of that, we have a new series starting. Now, let's kind of review what we've gone through so you understand this. The solar year can now be figured on the present 365 and a quarter days with this 11.232 minute shortfall. Thus, we have a leap year every 4 years. Well, we got that. We understand that. And we should have a minus 1 day every 128 years because we've been taking too much time. If we multiply 11.232 times 128, that equals 23 hours, 0.9616. Say, well, it's not quite perfect. That's true, it isn't. But the difference is so small that you would have to be carrying this out for like 10,000 years before it would register as a significant amount of time that had to be accounted for. And we're not going to go that far. So, for all practical purposes, we can see that everything in the solar calendar has been accounted for. There is an important thing that I would like to point out, and which I found as I kept entering these 7-day increments and building them into years and entering the years, I found that at 896th year, an interesting thing happened. What really happened is that the sequence that we found at creation started over. And here we see that. 1, 2, 3, 10, 5, 6. What this tells us is that every 896 years, the solar calendar will repeat itself. This is an interesting fact, and it's going to play into some of the work that you're going to see. Now we're switching gears. We're going to switch gears here, and we're going to be looking at some calendar information that I retrieved from the Britannica Encyclopedia. And this work here that you see was done by a gentleman named E.H. Lindo. And he did this work, surprisingly, he did this work in the early part of the 18th century. No computers, no help that way. He did it the hard way, pencil and paper, and figured out the days. He made his calendar to be a series of cycles. These cycles represent 13 19-year cycles. this particular cycle represents 19 years. If you counted from here to here, you'd see 19 years. The interesting thing is that despite the fact that he was doing this work back in the 1800s, he accurately shows that September 14th, 2015, and that September 14th would fall on a Monday. Now, what he's really telling us here, these days that you see here, are the first day of the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar. And, of course, this is what he did. He calculated all these days. We see, whoa, this is accurate. And so if we can follow this timetable and carry it back all the way back to the creation week, we would be able to establish an accurate time for the Hebrew calculated calendar. Now, you're going to see here some red numbers. Red numbers here, those were numbers that I added. They weren't E.H. Lindo's numbers. These are my numbers. And you'll notice there's a number 7 here. This is a number that I put in there. And here you'll see a number of days. It says 6,941 days. If you would add up all of the days that you see here as they are figured in the Hebrew calculated calendar, 354, 355, 385, da-da-da. If you added all those up, that's the sum total you would find. Here, we're going to see another set of these cycles. And this time, you will note that I have put a red number 1. This isn't the same number that he put in. It's a number I put in. Well, why did I put that number 1 in there for that particular cycle? There's a very important reason why I did that. Because when I figured this back, this October 2nd, Tuesday, October 2nd, and I figured back on that day, I found a very interesting thing. That the first day of that year was a Sunday. So that really, or as we would think of it biblically, as the first day of the week. So this cycle right here represents that particular set of circumstances. This was a critical piece of information that you should be aware of. Now, I'm going to show you what that meant, because if we use the generator and go back and find that first year, then we should see that the first Sabbath occurring on that year would be on the 7th, and it would have to agree with the solar calendar being on the 7th, because that's when God started the rotation of the earth around the sun and the moon around the earth. Now you'll see that I put in here the year 4046. Well, wait a minute. How did you determine that? Well, I'm going to show you how that was determined. And you put that year in and you hit BC, because we're looking at the first year, and that occurred in the BC years, generate, and it produced this calendar. There is one interesting thing. You'll notice here that in the black we have the 26th of March as the first Sabbath. Well, wait a minute. Shouldn't that be? No, that shouldn't be January, because January is in the middle of winter. God's calendar starts in spring. So the two calendars are shifted off. Now, how do you know? You might say, well, how do you know you got it right? Well, this is what I'm going to demonstrate. Here, we're looking at a chart that I made up, and I used the calculated calendar. And here you see the number of cycles, cycle 1, cycle 2, etc., all the way down to cycle 13. Those 13 cycles of 19 years each represent 247 years. Here in this column, you'll see the years. The end of cycle 1 would be 19 years, and etc., until we get down to the end of 247 years. That's the end of cycle 13. In this particular column, remember I showed you that red number on the cycles where I added up all of the days. This column represents the total number of days in that first cycle. And I also did the same thing for the solar year. I counted up all the days. And you know that we have the solar year accurate because I showed you how the solar year worked. I added up all those days, and they amounted to the same number. The second year, something happens. We have one extra day in the calculated calendar versus the solar calendar. And as we go through there, you can see we sometimes make up the day, and then it goes along even, then we fall behind, and eventually we get down here to the second last cycle of the 13 cycles, and you'll see that, well, everything is okay. Same number, there is no difference. But when we go to the 13th year, we see that we end up with a one day difference. Is this accurate? Why is that day in there? Well, here's the explanation for that. What we're looking at here in this Hebrew calculated calendar is the motion of the moon around the earth. So, in fact, we have two types of calendars running in a way at the same time. We have the solar calendar, which is represented by this one trip of the earth around the sun. Then we have the time it takes for the moon to travel one trip around the earth. And as a result of that, it takes 19 years for them to come into alignment. Now, when they come into alignment, there's a little factor here, just like there was in the solar year. There's a little factor. And actually, the moon has traveled just a little bit further than coming into perfect alignment. And that number is 2.0844. That's the number of hours that are different in that 19 years. If we calculate that out, we find that if you multiply that times the 13 cycles, because each cycle is going to have that difference, then you will find that you come up with 1.129 hours. So that is the lag. And you see, because we're dealing in days, in full days, the lag is represented here as 1 day. Now we go into the second, and you can see how the years are piling up. 247, here we got 248, and we go down here to 494, the last year. And we look there and we see, well, we have this 2 days. And if we calculate that 2.084 times and divide it by 24, we find that we have a 2-day difference by the time we get there. We had the 1 day from here, we have another day, we have 2 days difference. And this is carried on. In every one of these, I have gone through and entered these times and lags and numbers of days. In every year is entered here. As you can see this. Every cycle is entered. So as we finish this page of this particular chart, we're at 1,482 years. Let's go to the next page. And as we go through here, we see that on the bottom of the next page, we are at year 2,964. And notice here that the difference, the calculated difference, is 13.54, whereas the actual difference was 14. You can see that it's running pretty accurate. We'll go to the next page. And here, the last year is 4,446. And we see the calculated difference is 20.32. And here we see it's 21. The cycles are following right along with the calculations. Finally, we get to year 5,928. And we see there's a difference of 27, a little over 27. And here we see the difference in this as 28. So we see that it's following. Notice, we are now at 5,900 and some years. We're getting very close to what everyone thinks, where, when they've done calculations, many people have done it, we're right around 6,000 years from creation, but they don't really know for sure how many years have transpired. But as you've been seeing, we've been following this. And so we're going to be able to determine the exact number of years that have transpired. Here we go to the last page of this chart 6. And on there we see that the final 13th cycle is registered as 61,075 years. Well, that's way too many years. But how is it? How can we tell where the two calendars, where they're going to come together? We can do that because if we remember, when we looked at the charts of E.H. Lindo, and we looked at chart number 7, we were looking at the very years that we are in presently. The 2015 year was the final year of that cycle 7. All we have to do is look here and see where cycle 7 brings us. The end of cycle 7 brings us to 6,061 years. So now we know exactly how many years transpired from the first year of creation to the present. And this is how we can have an accurate calendar generator. Here I'm showing you cycle 7. Here is the day. Here is the year, 2015. And we recognize that this is what happened. And on September 14th, it was a Monday in 2015. This is absolute. The two are joined together. Once I had this information, I could now build a skeletonized calendar that would reflect every year from creation to the present, because I not only had the Hebrew calculated calendar oriented to the solar calendar, but I also have the Gregorian calendar oriented. What we see here, and what I did is I started at year 1, the creation year. I started there. Year 1, year 2, etc. And I entered in pertinent information for each one of these years. When we look at this, we see that the number of days in the year, 365. This is the solar calendar, remember. This is the days of carryover. Remember, we went back the first year at a 1-day carryover, and there it is. And the type of year, type 1. And the first Sabbath of that solar year was on the 7th. Well, it has to be that way. When we look at this, we see that, of course, here in red is the first Sabbath of the Hebrew calculated calendar. It was on the 7th. And there was a difference between the number of days, because if you remember, on that chart from E.H. Lindo, the first year only had 354 days in it. The solar calendar had 365, so the difference would be 11 days, and that's what you see right here. Well, let's go into the Gregorian calendar and see. When I went back, we recognized that that year should be 4046 BC. By doing the math work, that's what you'd find, and you'll see how this works out. Now, here is the first Sabbath of the Gregorian calendar. It was on the 1st of January. Well, the 1st of January didn't really exist at this time. So we can't really count that. We have to go into the second year, and there you'll see again, year 2, 365 days. It is a 2-day carryover, a type 2 year, and this time the Sabbath occurs on the 6th. Well, this is what we went through when we were doing the work initially. It was on the 6th. But the first Sabbath of the Hebrew calendar is going to be on a different day. And that first Sabbath is on the 3rd. And now we have 10 days difference between the two calendars, so we now have a grand total of 21 days difference. And this time we can determine that the first Sabbath, because now we will be able to see the month of January. We couldn't see the month of January in the first year because it occurs in the winter. And God's calendar starts in the spring. Therefore, we wouldn't be able to see that. But we can see the second year, and it's telling us that it's on the 7th. Well, we're going to be able to see that as we go through this. Now, you notice that the years descend as we're going through BC years. 46, 45, 44, 43. And this is always something to keep in mind whenever you're looking at this set of calendars, because here the years are going up on the other side, and here the years are going down on this side. What I've done here is shown you an extension of that chart. And the reason that I do that, you see this red 19 here? If we carry that over, we see a 1. Well, this is the end of the first cycle. And below it, you see a number 2. That's the start of the second cycle. This is important information that you need to understand, because that was what went into this calendar, into this skeletonized calendar. Here's 2015. Notice, we've followed these cycles. We've never missed a day. We followed them from creation to the present time, and of course, it comes out that it's the 7th cycle. It's kind of funny, we looked at this to see what cycle it was in, but when we actually did the calculations, we found that they matched. So this is an important understanding or proof of what we're doing here in this calendar generator. As we see this, we can understand how this whole system works together. Every entry that you would call up in the calendar generator is going to be reflected in this chart 3. There is no deviation. And this chart 3 reflects the passage of time in 7-day increments, as I've shown you from the beginning. We can see more of cycle 8, where you see 2016, 2017 will be in the future, 2018, 2019, etc. I just did that for that reason. Now, let's go back to that calendar generator, and let's enter that year. Now we know where that year 4046 came from. And so when we enter that 4046 year, and we utilize the BC year and generate, it produces a calendar. This is the same calendar we looked at before. And what we need to recognize here is something interesting. Remember, when we looked at C.H. Lindau's calendar, we found that Tuesday was the first day of the 7th month. Remember that? Maybe you didn't remember, but that's what it is. So when we look at this calendar, we should see this reflected. If this calendar is really accurate, it will reflect that Tuesday. Well, as we look at this, we see that the first Sabbath of the 7th month is on the 5th day of the month. So what does that mean? That's the 5th day. So if we back calculate, we would see that the first day of the 7th month does fall on a Tuesday. So you can see that the calendar generator is producing an accurate calendar here. Now, we'll go into the next slide, and we're going to see year 2 of the creation. And here we enter 4045 instead of 4046, and it's a BC year. We generate, and it produces a new calendar for us. Now, this calendar actually was joined from the first calendar. Remember, I told you that we had a lag, 11 days. We see that reflected in this particular, as we go in here, the 6th and the 17th day of the Hebrew calculated calendar. Here's the first Saturday or first Sabbath of the solar calendar. And if you subtract that 6 from the 17 above it, the corresponding day, you will have 11 days. And that's the difference. I'm just demonstrating how exactly accurate this generator is. It's showing that difference. Here we see that the first Sabbath of the month of January is on the 7th, just as that skeletonized calendar showed it would be. Now we'll go into the year 2015. The AM year turns out to be 6061, which is what we should recognize. So if we enter that year, 2015, and we hit AD and generate, this is the calendar that it produces. Now, we should find that date that we said that we had before. Remember, it was a Monday. If we take a look at this, and we see the first Sabbath of the 7th month is on the 6th. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that the first day of the 7th month was on a Monday, just as that calendar demonstrated. So you can see the accuracy of that calendar. And if you check, you would see that that Sabbath of the 6th of the 7th month, it is in agreement with the Gregorian calendar of 19. As we go into the next year, 2016, we're going to see how the years are joined together, and we're going to see how the 7th month is going to work out again. Here we find the Sabbath for the 7th month in 2016 is on the 6th, which means that the first of that year would be on a Monday. Now that was the same that we saw on the 15th, and this is actually, if we went back and consulted Chart 5, you would see that E.H. Lindo actually recorded those dates exactly as they're recorded here. Again, we're showing how the Gregorian calendar, the Hebrew calculated calendar, and the solar calendar are joined together. They are all in agreement. Now, we're going to go back once again to that September 11th. And now you'll better be able to appreciate the fact that this calendar for September 11th, 2001, is in agreement with the historic date of the destruction of the Twin Towers. Here you see that circle. It's circle September 8th, and you take and add 3 days. The 9th is a Sunday, the 10th is a Monday, and the 11th is a Tuesday, just exactly how it is historically portrayed. Here we see December 7th, 1941. And again, I'm just going back and demonstrating. You can see the 6th is circled. The 6th was a Saturday for December. So if you add 1 day, you find that that's Sunday, the 7th. We see that the generator is producing an accurate calendar here. You can see this with absolute confidence. Here we're looking at July 4th, 1776, the third example. And as I showed, we have the 6th circled here for a Saturday or Sabbath. And if we back up to get to the 4th, the 5th is a Friday, and the 4th is a Thursday. And that's exactly the day that we're supposed to have. So it's accurate. Now we're going to go to a new year, a different thing that took place in history. And this date is really an important historical date as far as the Christian religion is concerned, because it shows some very important information here. This year that we went to, which is 70 AD, is the year that the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the Second Temple. And here is what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah tract, Arkin 11b, page 65, states the same thing happened the second time. The statement shows the Second Temple was burned in 70 AD on the same day of the week and the same day of the month. And if we went on, we would find that the day that the Romans set fire was just as the Sabbath was ending in the 5th month, and that Sabbath was on the 9th day. The destruction of the temple was on the 10th day, as recorded. And this is the same thing that Jeremiah records for us about the first temple. It was destroyed or burnt on the first day of the week that followed the 9th Sabbath of the 5th month. Now, if we look here, you'll see this red circle on the 9th. This is the 5th month. And there was a Sabbath for that 70 AD on the 9th. And the temple was, of course, destroyed on the 10th. This is accurately demonstrating what took place in history as to the very day of the week that this happened. Now, this same thing occurred once again, as is stated here. The two temples, Solomon's temple, was destroyed on the same day of the week and on the same, following the same Sabbath of the 5th month. This is really an astonishing thing, but you're going to see how it is. Here's some information that not everybody is aware of, but in fact is quite accurate, and that is that 30 AD has been confirmed historically by the 5 witnesses as reaffirmed by the following information from Alfred Edersheim, the respected scholar, in his book, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, showing that the crucifixion was at the beginning of the 30 AD on the 14th of Nisan, the first month of the year, the Passover. Here we see he's saying, he has all these witnesses. If you go back to this Jewish historian, remember this man was Jewish, and if you go back to his written work, you will find that he confirms that the crucifixion was on the 30 AD. So this is an important thing for us to remember. So now, if we want to find out when the first temple, Solomon's, that was the second temple. We want to find out when the Solomon's temple was destroyed. We have to do some little calculation. Now, if we look here, and you read this, it says, Daniel 9:25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Well, okay, let's see how that would work out. If we do the calculation, we would come up with, right here I show it in red, 7 plus 62 equals 69 times 7 is 483 years. From the death of the Messiah to the declaration to rebuild Jerusalem, 483 years transpired. We just found out that on AD 30 is when Christ was crucified. That's when the Messiah was crucified. Once we recognize that, now what we have to do is figure backwards. And in that figuring, in the AD years, you can only take 29. You can't take 30 because it happened at the beginning of the 30th year. So therefore, you can only use 29 years. And you take that 29 years and you subtract it from 483, you get the resulting year of 4,548 BC. If we take that number of years from the death or crucifixion of Christ, which occurred on 30 AD, and we figure it against that 483 years, we will come up with the following BC year. First of all, we have to understand that there wasn't 30 years that you need to subtract. You need to subtract only 29 because the crucifixion occurred at the start of the 30th year. So you take 29 from the 483, and you end up in the BC year 4548. That was the year that the declaration was made. But we need to know something more than that. In Daniel 9, in the second verse of Daniel 9, it tells us that Jerusalem would lay in waste for 70 years. So we have to know when did the work actually start? But that wasn't the year that the rebuilding of Jerusalem was started. The rebuilding of Jerusalem was started the following year. Now, you can see the declaration if you go into Nehemiah chapter 2 and you go through verse 5 through 8. If you go into Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15, you'll see that the rebuilding of Jerusalem started in the 5th month on the 3rd day of the month. That's when it started. And you can see that 5th month, that's really close to the destruction, which occurred on the 10th day of the 5th month. Now, there's an important piece of information that you have to know, and that is that in Daniel 9, in verse 2, he tells us that the city of Jerusalem would lay in waste for 70 years. So now what we have to do is we have to take that year that we just looked at, that BC year, and we have to take and add that 70 years. And when we add that 70 years to that, we end up with the year 528 BC. Let's take a look and see what we see when we look at the calendar generator for 523 BC. And this is what we find. If we look here, we see in the 5th month, what do we have? We have a Saturday or Sabbath on the 9th. On the 9th day of the 5th month, the temple was destroyed on the 10th day. And you can see that you have the 70 years that God said that Jerusalem would lie in waste. So here we see that we have proven another time the accuracy of the calendar, and here we're going back into the BC years. What should this tell us? This should tell us that we now have an instrument that we can utilize in our studies or to confirm historical events. We have a calendar that's absolutely accurate, unfailingly. I demonstrated that we started that generator in the first year, and we followed the 7-day Sabbaths. And fact is that chart 3 is a skeletonized calendar carrying us from the creation year well beyond the year that we're presently in. And so the calendar generator is all that calendar generator is an absolute reflection of every one of those years that you found that were entered in chart 3. So be confident when you use the calendar generator that you are getting an absolutely accurate date.